If someone were to kill themselves using a knife, would you blame the knife? And if someone were to kill themselves using a rope, would you blame the rope? No. So why is it that when we see or hear about someone who has committed suicide using drugs, we automatically blame the drugs? Too often, society blames drugs and mental illnesses for tragic outcomes. What we should do as a society is look within. Through understanding and compassion, we can have a positive impact on those suffering from mental illnesses. Honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, society must recognize that the mentally ill need our help and sympathy, not our judgment and blame. Depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in our brain due to a lack of serotonin, the neurotransmitter of happiness. And this lack of serotonin makes people sad. Simple, right? Unfortunately, depression is a little bit more complex than that. Scientists have now discovered that our serotonin levels aren't the only factor which leads to depression. The growth and connections of our brain cells also have a role in this mental illness. If we were to look at the brain of a person suffering from depression, we would notice that their hippocampus, the part of the brain that controls our memories and emotions, is much smaller than usual. Scientists prove that the main cause of this is stress, which is also the main cause of depression, and the hippocampus literally deteriorates with time. You see, depression is not something a person can get over with time. We must understand that this is a biological illness that is also affected by our social and psychological self. Depression is a disease like any other, and talking about it is how we will surpass it. Do we stand down about battling cancer? No, we stand up and fight. Do we push aside those with broken bones? No, we reach out and support. Mental illnesses are exactly like these. They are illnesses, and if society keeps shaming and judging the mentally ill the way it's been doing for so long, no one will heal. It's not surprising that mental health is the leading cause of addiction. Actually, it's quite logical that it is. But what do we do when people get addicted to drugs? Instead of getting them the help they need to get their lives back together, we push them away and cast them out of society. Society makes it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. Instead, punishes them, sometimes to an extent of a prison sentence for the possession of narcotics. Doesn't that say a lot about our society? In the 1970s, Professor Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, came up with the theory that it is not the drug itself that gets us addicted, but rather our surroundings and entourage. This theory was tested in the Vietnam War. 20% of American soldiers who were sent to Vietnam used large amounts of heroin while there. A study followed these soldiers upon their return to the US and noticed that 95% of them did not continue to use drugs nor experience withdrawal signs. The basis of this experiment was to test if the surroundings of a human being has an effect on their decisions and mental stability. When put in miserable circumstances, many chose drugs to escape and cope, but when brought back to their loving and caring homes, where stability was found and a sense of purpose was given to them, the use of drugs was no longer a thought in their minds. This is what we must try and create for our society, a loving and nurturing environment where everyone is given a sense of purpose. We now live in a world where mental health and substance abuse can easily be considered a modern epidemic. The phenomenon of dual diagnosis is becoming more and more dangerous with time advancing. People with mental illnesses are twice as likely to develop an addiction compared to the general population, and at least 20% of people with mental illnesses have co-occurring substance abuse problems. These numbers are not supposed to be this high, and yet they are. Why? Because society allowed them to. We must start to take action. In 2014, over 4,000 Canadians took their lives away. That's an average of 11 suicides per day. In 2012, suicide accounted for 15% of deaths among children aged 10 to 14, 29% among children aged 15 to 19, and 23% among young adults aged 20 to 24. Unfortunately, drug addiction is common with the mentally ill. But we cannot blame nor shame them for using drugs because for many, it is their way to escape and cope from the indescribable amount of pain they are feeling within. Society can't understand how the brain of a person suffering from a mental illness works unless we've experienced it ourselves, which is why this issue is so hard to talk about. But we cannot let that stop us from fulfilling our duty as human beings and help those in need. I understand that these are topics that we do not talk about often, but at some point, enough is enough. While it might be hard, we need to speak up, help the people in need, and bring awareness to mental health problems so more research is conducted and we can fight these diseases. Society undermines depression so much we now use it as a synonym for sadness, and when people use drugs to escape their mental state, we call them junkies and treat them like criminals. For too long, society has only been working on individual recovery, when we now need to start working on social recovery. Because whether we like it or not, one way or another, we will be affected by these issues at one point in our lives. So let's not make the same mistakes society's been making for so long and finally change the narrative of our story. Because life is too beautiful to let it slip away by something we have the power to cure together. Thank you.